My parents suddenly appeared and started banging on the car window.
Dad, did someone ask you to do something?
Well, what might that be? You're always so stubborn. Just be quiet and persuade Steve. The chairman prefers his own father, so I'm going to decline. Otherwise. So, they were in cahoots with my in-laws, plotting to oust my husband Steve from his position as the next chairman. Then I noticed my mother was holding something like a crowbar. She swung it high and then, crash. The window shattered with a loud noise. I was stunned when I heard Steve's car, which had fallen off a cliff, was found with a suicide note. But a week after the car was discovered, an envelope arrived by courier, scheduled for that day. Steve? I quickly took the envelope and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter. And a key. Read this without letting my parents find out. Of course, I knew that. But he must have wanted to write it. This is something I wrote in advance in case something happened. If I'm there when you receive it, just laugh and give it back to me. But if I'm not, please, Hannah, take what's stored in this locker and run to my uncle's place immediately. Lucy, my sister-in-law, who was reading it with me, and I looked at each other. Then we grabbed the bare essentials and ran to the house where Steve's Uncle Ronald lived. To protect myself and my children, and to expose what our parents had done. My name is Hannah McKinley, 34 years old. I'd like to say I'm just a typical housewife, but that was only true until a week ago. Now, I'm a widow with 2 children. My husband Steve is said to have taken his own life. That's the most likely possibility, I was told. His car had fallen off a cliff. And they say a suicide note was found in the dashboard. I don't believe it, can't believe it. Because it's true. He had no reason to take his own life. Not himself. Rather. Steve and I met at our workplace. A real estate chain's resort hotel, that's where I had always wanted to work. As a child, I was captivated by a large, beautiful hotel I was invited to by my parents' acquaintance. I chose a college important for the tourism industry and worked part-time in a local hotel. Finally, I got a job at the resort hotel I had longed for. It was known for its rigorous employee training, and I almost gave up early on. I was able to keep going thanks to a senior employee at the time. Amidst people quitting one by one, unable to endure, there was someone who stayed and watched over me, the one who remained. He was Steve McKinley, who later became my husband. After 2 years of dating, we got married. But then I was shocked to learn the truth. Steve was the nephew of the chairman of this real estate group. He was supposed to become a top executive in the group, but at that time, he was still training as a regular employee at the resort hotel. After we got married, he moved from the hotel to real estate, often visiting his uncle, the chairman. Originally a local real estate business, the group expanded significantly after the 1950s. The current chairman is the second generation, and the company's success has been largely due to his efforts. Thanks to convincing his parents during the economic bubble, they suffered less when it burst. He then steadily advanced into resort development. But things got murky around the chairman, who had fallen ill the previous year. As he had no biological heir, Steve was named as his successor. And that's what shortened his life. I was shocked and struggled to accept the news of Steve's death from the police. That's when my in-laws, Marcus and Ivana, began bombarding me with phone calls. Hannah, Steve is in a real mess now, isn't he? A real mess? Is that the simple way they sum up their own son's situation? Hey, Hannah. It's gonna be tough for you alone from now on, right? Why don't you come to our place? Yeah. With Steve gone, you're going to have financial difficulties, won't you? My father-in-law and mother-in-law took turns saying such things. Feeling irritated by their words, I replied, I can't even begin to think about the future right now, and then I hung up the phone. I thought to myself, what are they talking about now? After all, I had only met these in-laws twice. Once to announce our marriage, and then on the wedding day. They didn't even show their faces when our son and daughter were born. Yes, Steve had been avoiding his parents, my in-laws. When I questioned Steve about his parents' behavior at the time of our marriage, he told me, they are scum who never even try to work for themselves. Steve's parents currently hold some positions within the McKinley Real Estate Group. But that's just to keep them from doing anything, Steve had explained to me. Apparently, unlike his talented uncle, everything they did turned out to be a setback for the group. So, they're given nominal positions and are made to travel under the guise of inspection, just to keep them from messing up. Didn't you go with them on these trips, seeing different places? Steve laughed it off. No way. Lucy and I were always left alone in our big house. Steve had a sister named Lucy. She married a man with no ties to the group and lived in a city where he worked. Steve's brother-in-law, Harvey, got along strangely well with Steve. When he was in town for work, he would go out of his way to talk to Steve. Lucy would say things like, "I'm jealous of Steve," about the way those men were. Yes, these two siblings got along well. Both had a strained relationship with their parents.
But I'm fine with it. Once I got married and moved away, I didn't care about them.
Lucy said breezily. But Steve is involved with the group. And what about it? Our parents know they're the failures of the group, so they hate seeing my successful brother. Is that how it is? It is in our family. But it must be different with your family, right? Not at all. That's right. I too had a poor relationship with my own parents. Well, it was good when I was a child. As an only daughter, I thought I was loved reasonably well. But their true nature revealed itself when I was in college.
Drop out of college and come back home.
That was the sudden message I received. The reason was a marriage proposal. They wanted to call me back in my early 20s, in the mid-2000s period, for that reason. It seems a son of a local dignitary had taken a liking to me when he returned to town. This spoiled rich kid insisted he wanted me, and my parents tried to fulfill his wish for their own benefit.
We raised you all this time, so you should be grateful to us, right?
I felt the image I had of my parents crumbling inside me. They had raised me, their daughter, hoping for something in return. When I realized this, I firmly refused to return home. Then they stopped sending money for my tuition and living expenses. They probably thought I would come back if they did that. But I didn't, not even out of stubbornness. I consulted my professor and looked for ways to continue my studies without being taken back by my parents. It was a struggle until I graduated. I managed to cover my tuition with scholarships. The problem was my living expenses. I moved out of my secure one-room apartment, sold my unused furniture, and moved into an old apartment. My life became a cycle of university, part-time jobs, and job hunting. I only went back to my room to sleep. As it turned out, this part-time job experience led to my employment and meeting Steve. And my parents were strangely happy about my marriage to Steve.
Aren't they good parents?
Comparing them to his own, Steve said with a wry smile. No, they're not. They did their research on you. They found out you are the nephew of the chairman of the real estate group. Steve couldn't believe it for a while. But he realized they were no different from his own parents when they came to see our son Sam and daughter Mia when they were born. My parents said like this.
Now that you have 2 kids, you'll be set for the future. Absolutely. And our lives will be easier too.
At that moment, I saw Steve's smile falter slightly. Both Steve and I were sensitive to those words which were spitted by our parents. Especially since Steve knew about my struggles during my college days. Were they a bit too relaxed, or did they just take it for granted? Either way, their words clearly indicated they were planning to leech off us and our children in the future. After that, Steve also became wary of them. Distant in-laws, overly eager parents. While being cautious of both, I continued raising our children. Fortunately, with Steve's current position and salary, we could afford a housekeeper and a sitter. We didn't have trustworthy relatives, but we managed on our own. But last year, things changed. The chairman fell ill. The chairman, still in his 60s, was a fitness enthusiast and seemed unlikely to get sick. He was in good shape, with no problems like high blood pressure. However, a head injury from his youth had developed into a hematoma, putting pressure on his brain. Emergency surgery saved his life, and he had a good prognosis with no lasting effects. But this incident shook the group, as there was no designated successor. The chairman probably thought he could keep going and hadn't decided on a successor. But illness can strike suddenly. Once that became clear, it was necessary to think about a successor. And then, the choice of successor became an issue. The chairman and his wife had no children. There were no biological or adopted children at this point. So, during his convalescence, the chairman nominated Steve. It seemed a reasonable choice to most senior staff in the group. They knew Steve was training within the group and receiving executive education. But there were people who couldn't accept it. Steve's parents.
Just wait a minute, Ronald. He's still young, isn't he? Shouldn't I be the closest one to you? That's right. Why choose Steve over this guy?
It seems they confronted the chairman, who was resting, with these words. The chairman apparently rebuked them.
If I leave the group to you, it'll be ruined.
He then clearly explained why he chose Steve. But that turned their hostility towards Steve. They demanded he step down, saying he should tell his parents to take over because he was still young. Frankly, it was a threat. At first, they were asking as a favor, but gradually their tone changed to do something about it, or else.
This is getting a bit dangerous.
What do you mean?
If we leave them be, they might harm me, you, or even our kids.
What? I initially wondered if they would go that far. They will. Steve spat out.
I've never thought of them as my parents. And they probably don't think of us as their children.
No, that's not right.
They see children as tools to generate benefits for themselves. It's the same with my parents.
No. Steve shook his head.
Their level of scumminess is worse. Your parents, at least, want to hang on to the benefits, but mine want to take the benefits themselves.
What should we do then? The word take made me shudder. A family filled with love and trust that I had finally found. I didn't want anyone to get hurt.
I have an idea. First, we'll make sure the building manager prevents any suspicious people from entering. Hannah, you need to protect the kids when you go out. Can I do it alone? I'll ask my uncle to arrange for a security company. They'll discreetly guard you when you're out.
Understood, I replied. From then on, I chose popular places for outings with the kids as much as possible. I actively participated in gatherings with mom friends that I usually hesitated to join. It's harder for someone to make a move when my children and I are in a group. But even then, there was an attempt to abduct my child. It first happened while we were playing in the park. I was supposed to be watching the kids with the other moms. A plump middle-aged woman, who seemed to be just taking a walk, suddenly grabbed my daughter and ran. Then, a security guard who had been watching over us quickly intervened. But the woman who was almost kidnapping my daughter, surprisingly agile for her size, managed to escape. We never found out who she was or why she did it. It's a scary world out there. Let's all be careful, everyone said. We all agreed to be cautious, not just against kidnappings for ransom or pranks. But there was one thing I had overlooked.
Hey there!
I unexpectedly ran into my parents in the apartment parking lot. It was when I was getting out of the car after shopping with the kids. In a panic, I hurried back into the car and locked the doors. My parents blatantly and forcefully started knocking on the car windows.
Mom, why are Grandpa and Grandma doing this? I'm scared.
I slightly opened the window, just enough to fit my fingers through, and asked my parents. I really didn't want to open it, but I couldn't talk to them with it closed.
What do you want? Ah, finally you opened up. Listen, Hannah, can you talk to Steve? What? You know, it doesn't seem right that young Steve becomes the next chairman. Isn't that order wrong?
A chill ran down my spine. Could it be that these people?
Dad, did someone ask you to do something?
What are you talking about? My dad feigned ignorance. Then my mom said, "You're always so stubborn. Just quietly persuade Steve. Tell him it's better if his own dad becomes the chairman and he should decline. Otherwise." In her hand was something like a crowbar.
Then, with a big swing, crash! The window shattered with a loud noise.
The children screamed and cried. My mom then reached her hand through the broken window.
Get down!
I yelled to the kids and started honking the horn to signal the security guards, who I hoped were somewhere nearby. Fortunately, the sound of several men running towards us could be heard.
Damn it!
My parents clicked their tongues and quickly left the scene, getting into a nearby car and fleeing. "Are you okay?" the security guards asked us.
I'm fine, but the kids. We're okay.
My son replied loudly. But it was certain that shards of glass had fallen on both of them.
We'll go back to our apartment right away. Can you please escort us to the entrance?
The guards agreed and accompanied us. The building manager was surprised to see our condition and promised to be vigilant against outside intruders. That evening, when Steve returned, I told him everything. My own parents, of all people. Yeah, they must have been roped in. Promised a good position if they become chairman or something. It was very possible. Very, very possible. Why did our parents have to be such people? This is seriously bad. I'm going to my uncle's place to ask if he can hide you and the kids for a while.
To Uncle Ronald's? Yes, but we have to do it without being noticed. Also, I'll contact Lucy. I want her to stay with you guys for a bit. But won't that be a bother to Lucy? Given the situation, it's necessary. And since I'm being considered for the successor, they might think the same for Lucy, being of the same bloodline. We're better off forming a united front.
Steve then immediately contacted Lucy.
I can't believe it. All right, Steve, I'll join you. What about my husband, Harvey? Harvey has his work, doesn't he? Yeah, but okay, I'll talk to him. Thanks.
Having siblings at times like this is great, I thought. And the next day, Lucy came over right away.
I told Harvey about the situation, and he said he wants to check a few things and will join us later.
Really?
Harvey is dependable.
Well, of course, he's the man I chose. We laughed together at that. But the day after we had that conversation, I received that call from the police.
Steve McKinley's car was found at the bottom of a cliff.
I couldn't grasp the meaning of their words right away. What does that mean?
He was just brought to the hospital.
I couldn't fully comprehend the rest of what was said. I was aware the person on the other end was speaking, but I couldn't move. Surprised by my reaction, Lucy took over the call for me. After that, I was mostly led around by Lucy to various places. We went to the police station, confirmed the news, and were handed an envelope found in the dashboard. A suicide note! When I opened it, there was a printed letter. The content was about not being able to bear the responsibility of being appointed chairman, and being regrettable for it.
So, the police concluded that my brother took his own life? No, there's still an autopsy to be done. We've only shown you this because it was found.
He wouldn't do that to himself! I raised my voice then and there. How could he, after telling us to be so careful? I couldn't articulate any more words after that. The police said they would contact us when it was time to retrieve Steve's body. I vaguely remember the time that followed. The local news on TV kept saying that it was unclear whether it was an accident, but a suicide note was found, suggesting it was likely a self-inflicted death. Angry, I turned off the TV, and my kids looked at me anxiously. When is Daddy coming home? My son is 8 and my daughter is only 5. Both had been kept out of school and kindergarten for a little while. Having Lucy around was truly a blessing during this time. My mind felt like it was covered with a thin veil, making everything feel unreal. Then, a week after Steve's car was found, an envelope arrived via courier, scheduled for that day. Hannah, this is for you. Lucy handed it to me as I was lost in thought. I glanced at the sender's name and my eyes widened.
Steve? In a hurry, I took the envelope and opened it with trembling hands.
Inside was a letter. And a key.
Read this without letting my parents find out.
Of course, I knew that. But he must have wanted to write it.
This is something I wrote in case something happened to me. If I'm there when you receive it, just laugh and give it back to me. But if I'm not, I'm begging you, Hannah, take what's stored in this locker and run to Uncle Ronald's place right away.
Lucy and I exchanged looks as we read. Then, in a hurry, taking only the bare essentials, we took the kids and got into Lucy's car. My car had been in repair since that incident. I didn't trust myself to drive a loaner car to another state to Ronald's place. So, I asked Lucy to do it. Leave it to me, but put on a knit hat and mask, Lucy said with a smile. And then we just drove. We were on edge until we reached Ronald's house in the neighboring state. I assumed the security guards were nearby. But I was still worried about something happening to the car, especially after what happened to Steve. We had already informed Ronald we were on our way, and upon arriving, we parked inside the property and rushed to the main building. Ronald, the chairman, and his wife Olivia were already waiting to welcome us.
You made it, Hannah, Lucy. Steve told me to put guards on you, and that he'd send you here eventually. But I never imagined it would come to this. Thank you for having us. I'm sorry to bother you, but we had nowhere else to turn.
I appreciated them sincerely. The children were looking around the grand entrance, wide-eyed.
Don't worry. I never thought it would come to this. I underestimated the situation. I never thought they'd actually go after Steve himself, those people.
He clenched his fist in frustration. We were then led into a spacious living room. It was a room with a warm and peaceful atmosphere. His wife Olivia instructed the housekeeper, and soon, she brought treats for the kids to one corner of the room.
Thank you. It's all right. You'll want to keep the kids within your sight now, won't you?
Yes, I didn't want to take my eyes off them for even a moment. But the conversation we were about to have was not something I wanted the children to hear.
That man has always been rotten to the core. But even though we wanted to exclude him from the group, we never quite had the definitive evidence. Letting him run loose has led to this. It's not your fault, Uncle Ronald. My parents were also involved in this. Both Steve and I, we unfortunately shared the same fate of having terrible parents. If I had known it would come to this, we should have taken Steve in as our adopted son much earlier,"
said Olivia, almost to herself. Then, Ronald suddenly looked up.
"That's right, that's a good idea. Call the lawyer." "Uncle Ronald?
I don't want those kids to end up like Steve." With those words, he made a proposal to me. Eventually, Steve's body, after the autopsy, was brought to Ronald's house. It was for a private funeral and a memorial service within the group. I attended, hosting the funeral with the children. My parents sat behind us, blatantly as a part of the family. Attendees like superiors and colleagues, all bewildered and saddened by Steve's sudden loss, expressed their condolences.
Steve was truly a great employee. We were all looking forward to his future in the group. Thank you. Steve would have been honored to hear that.
I mechanically repeated such greetings. His peers and friends, my own friends, cried over his unexpected loss. Everyone involved with Steve personally was genuinely good. But his parents. After the memorial service, Ronald gathered the family, in-laws, and management at his house. The large garden and hall of his house were crowded with many people. Amidst this, someone came rushing in.
"Harvey!"
Lucy's husband, Harvey, had just arrived. He was clutching a bag tightly as he ran.
"Sorry I'm late, Lucy, Hannah. I got held up with some things. But having the memorial and general meeting on the same day helped. I managed to get everything done."
Harvey grinned.
"I return these to you,"
he said, pulling out a set of documents and a memory stick from his bag.
"Is everything all right now?"
It was the contents from the locker indicated by the key we received the other day. After rushing off by Lucy's car, we met up with Harvey, who made copies of the documents and the memory stick.
"You've handed the copies to our lawyer, right?"
"Yes."
"That's good. We needed the originals here."
I nodded vigorously. At the general meeting, Ronald talked about the incident in front of everyone, expressing his regret over losing Steve, the intended successor. And when there was a pause in his speech, Ronald began with something else. "It's truly a regrettable situation. And I think there's one thing where I was wrong," said the chairman. He called me and my two children closer. Understandably, amidst the crowd of adults, the kids looked scared, as if they were about to cry. I reassured them from behind, saying it's okay. Therefore, I have decided to announce the next successor right here. My new children, Sam and Mia. They are Steve's kids, but I have adopted them both. A murmur went through the crowd at the mention of the children. Many of you must be surprised. But I believe this tragedy happened because Steve remained just a nephew. Right? The crowd's gaze shifted to Ronald and Olivia at his words.
"What are you saying, Ronald? Should this be discussed here?"
"Yes, it should."
"He took his own life, right? A suicide note was found. Probably couldn't bear the expectations placed on him." "Really? You still have more to say?"
"Yes."
"So, you're adopting these kids now? Putting unnecessary pressure on them again?"
"Who knows?
They are your grandchildren, after all. They might not feel such pressure."
Steve's father Marcus' face twisted.
"Actually, Steve didn't take his own life,"
Ronald stated firmly. The crowd began to murmur.
"What do you mean? A suicide note was found in the dashboard, wasn't it? We, the police, have not released any information about finding a note in the dashboard."
Then Harvey spoke up, asking Ronald for permission to speak.
Go ahead, I trust you.
Meanwhile, Marcus kept resisting clumsily.
If it was found in the car, then that's how it is, right? We haven't leaked such information to the media at all. Or perhaps, Marcus, you really had no interest in what I do.
With that, Harvey took out his police badge from the inside pocket of his suit. Indeed, he was a lieutenant from the police department in the county we lived in. Marcus was speechless. Did he really not know? I was genuinely astounded. I had heard from Lucy that she hadn't been in contact since she started working. And they only reported their marriage. Still, wouldn't one at least care about the profession of their daughter's partner?
That's just the kind of person he is.
Lucy muttered.
I could only provide crucial evidence in the investigation.
Harvey continued. The police had been investigating Steve's car from the start, noticing early on that something had been done to the brakes. It seemed this tampering happened on the day Steve sent the letter by courier.
Steve first went to place something in a locker at the station, then went to a convenience store there to send the letter to Hannah. It took some time.
That's when the brake system was tampered with. But it wasn't immediately dangerous.
Later, Steve drove towards this house. On the way, he encountered a road with several winding sections, right?
The crowd started whispering. Yes, many agreed.
There, he was subjected to the harsh drive because of road rage driving following his car, intentionally, as obvious. The roads here aren't always wide, you know.
Indeed, it's a common issue in rural areas, busy roads that aren't wide enough.
Steve was forced into a situation where he had to brake precisely. But eventually, he realized the brakes were failing, and it was too late. So that's what happened. True?
Ronald asked gravely. His words were unclear, but the meaning was understood by all.
Yes. And the police have identified the road rage driver from Steve's dashcam and have him in custody.
Harvey said, smiling at my in-laws.
But how are we connected to this? The road rage driver seems to have been just a hired person. The actual employer is still under investigation. However, you, Marcus, are already set to be prosecuted for a different case. A different case? Yes. For the embezzlement you've been committing for years. Steve had been quietly investigating this. Here's the evidence.
Suddenly, several projectors around the room lit up, displaying various documents on the walls.
We are arresting you for the embezzlement of the moment.
The doors opened, and police entered the room.
And
Harvey glanced briefly at me, then elsewhere.
You there? Us?
My parents were half getting up from the seat.
You have a warrant for your arrest for destroying Hannah's car. What? It's just family matters.
My mother protested. I confronted her sharply.
Family? A parent who breaks a car window with a crowbar? Indifferent to shards falling on their grandchildren?
Glaring fiercely, I spoke with all the strength I could muster.
You are not parents to me at all.
Stunned, my parents slumped back into their seats. After that, my in-laws, arrested for embezzlement, confessed during their interrogation to a plan to eliminate Steve, adding to their charges. My parents were also charged with property damage and aiding my in-laws' scheme. The case was first leaked to the local media, making headlines in regional newspapers and news broadcasts. But it didn't end there. Given the sensational nature of the story and the fact that it involved a crime orchestrated by the actual parents, it became fodder for national news and talk shows. And in today's age, that wasn't the end of it. Stigmas were all but stamped on them, marking their identity online forever. Even if they were released, it's hard to imagine what they could possibly do. But that's no longer my concern. Since then, we have been living in Ronald's house, provided with rooms of our own. Olivia adores the two new children, Sam and Mia, perhaps a bit too much. Given that she always wanted children but couldn't have any. For now, I think it's all right. Sam and Mia, having just lost their father, had to change schools and kindergarten. I feel sorry for involving them in adult conflicts. But considering their safety, this seems to be the best solution. As for Ronald, he is determined to stay healthy at least until Sam and Mia come of age, focusing on his physical fitness every day.
Everyone, tea is ready.
I spend my days here taking care of my children and being a companion to Ronald and Olivia. I don't know how much help I am to them, But for the sake of the children, I intend to live my life to the fullest.